When my grandson Ethan asked for a DNA test last Christmas, I thought it was just another silly trend. You know, one of those online kits. Everyone was obsessed with people finding out they were part Viking or discovering some long-lost cousin in another country. I laughed when he handed me the little box and said, "Nana, it's just for fun." He wanted to know more about our ancestry, about where we came from. But deep down, I felt something twist in my stomach, because there were parts of my past I'd carefully buried for 50 long years. I watched him swirl that tiny plastic vial of saliva and seal it in the return envelope with excitement glowing in his young eyes. He said, "Maybe we'll find royal blood, Nana." I smiled for him, but inside my hands trembled. Weeks passed, and I pushed the thought out of my mind. My daughter, Claire, was busy planning her 50th birthday, and I was just trying to keep my arthritis from flaring. I'd learned to live with ghosts quietly, obediently. Until that afternoon, when Ethan burst into the living room, his laptop glowing with colors and graphs. His face was pale, confused. "Nana," he said, "can you come here a second?" The way he looked at me, I'll never forget it. His eyes darted between me and the screen, and his voice quivered. "Something's wrong with the test." He turned the laptop toward me. There were names, percentages, connections I couldn't understand. "It says Grandpa Thomas isn't my biological great-grandfather," Ethan whispered. I froze. For a moment, time folded in on itself. The air thickened. My heart raced so violently I thought it might burst right through my chest. "That's impossible," I managed to say, though even as the words left my lips, I knew the lie had come home to roost. He showed me the chart again. Thomas's name wasn't there. Instead, another man's name appeared, matched across 3 generations of genetic threads. I knew that name. I'd whispered it in the dark 50 years ago. "Do you know a man named Robert Callahan?" Ethan asked. My throat tightened. I sat down slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I could feel the color drain from my face. "Yes," I whispered. "I knew him once, a very long time ago." Ethan looked scared now. "But how could that be, Nana? He's showing up as my great-grandfather." The truth hovered between us, thick as smoke. I could almost hear the years cracking open like dry earth after a storm. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked around me, and every sound carried a memory I'd tried to forget. I walked to the old chest at the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in decades. Inside lay faded letters, tied with a ribbon that had long lost its color. I untied it with trembling fingers. The first letter began, "My dearest Margaret, you are the light of every morning I wake to. Robert Callahan, the man I was never supposed to love." I remembered his laugh, the way he used to tuck a daisy behind my ear, how he promised he'd come back for me. But war took him away, and duty chained me to another man. Thomas was stable, respected, kind in a distant sort of way. Everyone said I was lucky. I told myself that too for years, until I almost believed it. But now, half a century later, my grandson's innocent curiosity had torn open a wound I thought had healed. Part 2. The man I buried in my heart. 1,000 words. Robert Callahan was the first man I ever truly loved. We met in the spring of 1954, when the world still smelled of fresh rain and promises. He worked at the docks, tall and strong, with hands rough from labor but eyes soft as sunlight. My father used to send me to the market every Saturday, and that's where he first noticed me, struggling to carry a basket full of potatoes. "Let me help you with that," he'd said, grinning. That grin became my undoing. We spent the summer meeting in secret by the riverbank, behind the church, under the willow tree that still stands near Miller's Field. We talked about everything: music, dreams, how we both wanted a life that wasn't trapped by the expectations of our small town. But in 1955, my father arranged my marriage to Thomas Reeves, a respectable banker's son 10 years older than me. "He'll take care of you," Father said. "Love isn't everything, Margaret. Stability is." I cried until my pillow turned cold. Robert wanted to elope. I wanted to say yes, but fear and family duty held me prisoner. I married Thomas that winter, my heart breaking with every vow I spoke. Yet fate has a cruel sense of humor. 6 months later, Robert returned unexpected, desperate. "I can't live without you," he told me in the dark behind the church where no one could see. I wept in his arms. One night, one foolish, reckless night, we forgot the world. We forgot right and wrong. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Thomas never questioned the timing. He was overjoyed when Claire was born, her bright green eyes nothing like his, nothing like mine, but they were Robert's eyes. Every time she looked at me, I saw him staring back. I buried the truth. Buried it so deep that even I pretended it never happened. Until now. Ethan's test had unearthed the past. And it wasn't just a secret anymore. It was proof, printed in black and white. The next morning, Claire called. "Mom, what's going on with Ethan's DNA results? He's been acting strange." My voice trembled. "It's nothing, dear, just a mix-up." But she wasn't convinced. She came over that evening, holding a printed report. "Mom," she said softly, "why does this say my father isn't Thomas?" I looked at her. My only daughter, the living piece of a forbidden love. The guilt I'd carried for 50 years crashed down like a wave. "Because it's true," I whispered. She stepped back as if struck. "What do you mean?" "Your real father's name was Robert Callahan." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she sank into a chair, covering her mouth. You lied to me my entire life." Tears blurred my vision. "I was young, Claire. I was scared. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" she cried. "The truth?" Her voice cracked, and something inside me shattered. "From scandal, from shame, from losing everything," I said through sobs. "Back then, a woman's mistake could ruin an entire family. I loved you. I loved him. But I couldn't have both." The silence that followed was unbearable. The clock ticked. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't sleep after Claire left. The house felt like it had been turned inside out, each quiet corner suddenly bright with the things I'd hidden there. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea that went cold 3 times while dawn unstitched the night, thread by thread, over the backyard ash tree. I watched the condensation bead on the window and thought, over and over, about the way Claire had looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if I had stolen something precious from the girl she used to be. I kept hearing her voice. "You lied to me my entire life." It moved through the rooms like a draft, lifting the edges of old photographs in their frames, teasing open the drawer where I kept birthday candles and spare keys, as if the truth could be tidied away again with rubber bands and paper clips. By 8, I'd made the bed twice and ironed a towel that didn't need ironing, just to give my hands something to do. I told myself I would call her no. I would go to her, but then the front door opened without a knock, and Ethan stepped in, tall and hunched, the way boys try to make their big bodies small when they're afraid of breaking something fragile. He closed the door gently and stood with his back to it, eyes searching my face like he might find a simpler story there, one he could live with. "Nana," he said, voice soft. "Mom's not talking. She left her phone on the counter and drove somewhere. Dad says she's fine, but he doesn't know where she went." My heart dipped. A dozen terrible roads opened in my mind. Bridges and quiet parking lots, the long, blank stretch of the coast road where you can pull over and stare at the water forever. I took a breath and reached for him. He let me fold him into my arms like he was little again, when old cartoons and toast fingers could fix anything. I felt his heartbeat under his sweatshirt and wished, with a fierceness that surprised me, that I could still be that kind of magician. "It's my fault," I said into his shoulder. "I held everything too tight, and now it's snapped." He pulled back and looked at me with those eyes that used to be my secret, Robert's green, flecked with gold at the center like a leaf held to the sun. "Is he alive?" he asked. "Robert?" The name felt like a match struck in a dark room. I shook my head. "If he is, he would be very old. I don't know. I never knew how his story ended. I only knew how mine had to go." He nodded, swallowing. "I think Mom went to the cemetery," he said. "She took flowers. Not the kind she brings for Grandpa Thomas. She took wild flowers from the vase by the sink." He squeezed his eyes shut, as if pinching off a thought. "She never brings wild flowers for anyone." I understood something then, a small glinting shard of sense in a heap of broken glass. Claire would be angry with me, yes, and hurt and bewildered, but none of that would stop the tether from pulling her toward him, the man she did not know and had always known. Children trace their own faces back through the mirror until they find the original. I had feared this day because I knew the pull would be irresistible once it began. Blood calls to blood in a language we pretend we can't hear. "Drive me," I said. "If she's there, we'll find her. If she's not, we'll still have done something other than sit here waiting for the walls to talk." We rode in silence, the town sliding past, ordinary and indifferent, the bakery with its sugared window, the hardware store where I'd once bought nails and a watering can for a garden that never grew the way I wanted. At the light by Miller's Field, I asked Ethan to turn right instead of left. "There's a place I have to see first," I said, surprising myself. "It's on the way." We parked by the old willow. Time had thinned it, but its long green hair still brushed the ground. I stepped onto the grass and felt the world pitch slightly under me, as if it remembered, too. The river moved slow, its surface skimming the light like a hand smoothing wrinkled sheets. I could feel Robert here, not as a ghost exactly, but as a pressure change. a hush in the air, the way a room feels right before someone speaks your name. "This is where we met," I said. "Where I told him I couldn't go with him. Where he put a daisy in my hair and said he'd come back for me. He did come back once, and then I stopped, a thin, embarrassed smile pulling at my mouth. Then I tried to make a dutiful life fit around a wild heart." Ethan's face softened. "I like that you loved," he said. Simple as that, and my eyes stung in that instant, because for all the harm concealment had done, love itself had not been the crime. It was the silence around it that had sharpened to a blade. We found Claire on the far edge of the cemetery, where the older stones lean and squint through lichen. She sat cross-legged on the grass, a bundle of daisies cradled in her lap. When she saw us, she didn't startle. She only watched as we approached, careful, like we were crossing a stream from one slick stone to the next. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, not looking at me but not refusing either. "I wanted to be someplace quiet. I kept thinking if I'm going to meet him, it should be where I can hear him." She laughed then, a small, cracked sound, as if the dead sit around waiting to explain themselves. Ethan crouched beside her and rested his chin on his knees. I lowered myself carefully to the grass. The world tilted again, slow, and came right. We sat without speaking for a while, just letting the sunlight settle on our shoulders. A bee trembled over a cluster of clover. In the distance, a mower droned, a domestic dull sound I found myself grateful for. It kept the day tethered. "I don't know how to be angry at you," Claire said finally, and every muscle in my body went rigid, bracing for what followed. "I mean, I am angry. I'm furious, but I can't hold it in one place. It keeps sliding off you and sticking to everything else, to the town, to the way people were, to men with plans and money who tell you something is for your own good, to my father, who I love, who raised me, who might have known more than I thought." Her voice thinned. She looked at me. Did he know? Did Thomas know? The question landed with the weight of a key pressed into my palm. For years, I'd kept it buried under everything else, but in truth I'd been puzzling over it the whole night and through the morning, worries tilting and retilting like pictures hung on crooked nails. There had been signs I hadn't allowed myself to read, the way Thomas avoided looking into Claire's eyes for too long, the night he'd come home and stood in the doorway of her room, a strange tenderness on his face, and then turned away before she could wake and see it, the envelope he once burned in the sink, the ashes swirling like snow as I tried not to ask. "I don't know," I said, and even as the words left me, something inside me tugged at my sleeve like a child. "Ask the better question," it seemed to say. "Ask what a man who lives by rules does when he finds himself inside a story without any—" I swallowed. "But I think," my voice shook, "I think he suspected. Maybe he even confirmed it, quietly, in a way that let him keep living the life he decided we should have." Claire stared, eyes wide, and I could see the math of it moving behind her gaze. Anger throbbed at her temples and then receded, replaced by a wary curiosity. "What makes you think that?" I told her about the letter I saw him burn, and the names I thought I glimpsed through the envelope window, my name, and a name that wasn't his. I told her about the day a man in a gray hat stopped me on the sidewalk and asked, polite and stiff, if I needed anything, and how Thomas had appeared at my elbow like a shadow and sent the man away with a tilt of his head. "What man?" Claire asked, alert now, leaning forward. "He said he was a colleague from the bank, but I never saw him there. He had a pin on his lapel, a small brass thing shaped like a tiny leaf. I always meant to ask Thomas about it. I never did." Ethan's voice came low. "A leaf, like the one in our DNA report logo." We looked at him. He flushed. "I just mean symbols repeat. Maybe it means nothing." He pulled a folded paper from his hoodie pocket. "I printed something before I came. There's a close family match listed as private with a note. Contact administrator for Access Reeves Estate." The world narrowed to a single point of sound, the paper crackling as he unfolded it. Reeves Estate. Thomas's brother had been an attorney. He handled wills and quiet arrangements. He kept a filing cabinet with 2 locks, one obvious and one hidden under a strip of felt. I dusted that cabinet for years, pretending it was just furniture. My hands went cold as the field of daisies. I could see a path now, thin but walkable. A brother who knew the law. A man who suspected the truth. A tidy arrangement to hold a family together while keeping the wildness caged. "I think there's something in his study," I said, and the words tasted like metal, like a key you carry under your tongue. "Not at the bank, at the house, in the cabinet behind his desk." Claire's breath hitched. "Mom, that cabinet has been locked since he died." "I know," I said. "I know where the key is." Ethan's eyes flashed. "Where?" I reached into the oldest pocket I owned, the one a seamstress had sewn inside my coat when coats were mended, not replaced, and touched the tiny, star-shaped key that had warmed there against my skin for 30 years. "In the hem of my winter coat," I said softly. "He told me to keep it once when he was sick and sentimental. He said it was for, in case the wind ever knocks us over." I thought he meant household papers, taxes. I think he meant this. We stood together, the 3 of us, a little unsteady, the ground soft after last night's rain. I took one of the daisies from Claire's lap and set it on the nearest stone, an unmarked kindness for the unknown. When we turned to go, the willow leaves shivered though there was no breeze. On the drive back to the house, nobody spoke. It felt like we were carrying water in a bowl, careful to keep our steps even. The key was a small weight in my palm, a fact at last, not just the idea of one. In the hallway, the study door stood patient and dark, and the air inside smelled of old leather and that trace of cedar I used to tuck in drawers. Nothing in that room had moved since the day we closed it after his funeral, the pens still aligned, the paperweight still pressing a curl of invoices. Claire stared at the cabinet, knuckles whitening where she gripped her sweater sleeves. "Are you sure?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I can't go another night not knowing which parts of my life I actually lived, and which parts were lived for me." I knelt, hands steady now in a way that made me realize how long they'd been shaking. I slipped the key into the hidden lock under the felt strip. It turned with a small, obedient click, the sound of a secret deciding it's tired. I looked at my daughter. then my grandson, and opened the cabinet. The air in Thomas's study always smelled faintly of tobacco and varnish. Even after all these years, the scent clung stubbornly to the curtains, the shelves, the old leather chair that still bore the faint indentation of his shape. I hesitated in the doorway, my hand on the frame, and for a strange moment I could almost hear him breathing that steady, patient rhythm that used to make me feel both safe and suffocated. Claire stood beside me, her arms crossed, eyes flicking nervously between the desk and the cabinet. Ethan lingered by the window, fidgeting with the curtain cord. The silence was thick enough to taste. I crouched again, turning the tiny star-shaped key. The second lock gave way, with a click so quiet it barely seemed real. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, with the kind of trembling defiance that only comes from decades of waiting, I opened the cabinet. Inside were 3 thick folders, a stack of envelopes bound with a black ribbon, and a small wooden box. Everything was labeled in Thomas's meticulous handwriting. The first folder read, "Margaret, personal." The second said, "Claire, legal." The third, "R. Callahan." My breath caught. Claire noticed immediately. "That's him," she whispered. "Robert Callahan?" Ethan stepped forward, eyes wide. "How could Dad," he corrected himself, his voice shaking. "How could Grandpa have that?" I didn't answer. My fingers hovered over the folder before I finally lifted it out. The paper was yellowed, the edges curled, but everything was carefully organized. The first document was a letter, dated 1973, the year Claire turned 18. "To my brother Edward," it began. "In the event of my passing, or should Margaret ever inquire, these papers are to be kept in confidence. The truth should not be buried, but released when time allows it to heal rather than destroy." The words blurred for a second. I blinked, trying to steady myself. Claire took the letter gently from my hands. "So he knew," she whispered. "All this time he knew. There was more. Birth certificates, affidavits, and beneath them a medical document." My eyes darted across the words, "Paternity confirmation, Claire Reeves, biological father, Robert Callahan." Thomas had tested it, secretly, quietly, without ever confronting me. I sank into the leather chair, the weight of 50 years pressing against my chest. "He knew," I said softly, "and he chose silence. He protected us, even from the truth." Claire's voice cracked. "He protected the lie, Mom." But I shook my head. "No. He protected the life, the one we built. He loved you like his own, Claire, more than his own, maybe. And me. He forgave me without saying the words." Her eyes glistened with tears, her anger softening into something heavier, grief perhaps, or understanding. She looked at the remaining box on the bottom shelf. "What's that?" I reached for it, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside was a small, folded note and a silver chain with a daisy pendant. My throat closed. The pendant was the same shape as the one Robert had given me on our last night together. The note beneath it was written in Robert's hand. "To Margaret, should this ever find you, I never stopped loving you. I left not because I wanted to, but because I was told it was the only way to keep you safe. They came to me, Thomas's brother, Edward. He said there was a way to protect your name, your child, and your family. The condition was silence. I agreed. Tell her when she's ready. Tell her I never forgot the willow tree. The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. He didn't leave me, I whispered. He was pushed away. Claire covered her mouth in shock. Grandpa Thomas's brother made a deal with him? I nodded slowly, piecing the puzzle together. Edward must have gone to Robert after you were born. He wanted to contain the scandal, keep the family's reputation intact. Thomas couldn't bear to destroy me or expose you. So they struck a bargain. Robert would disappear, and in exchange, you'd be raised as Thomas's daughter, no questions, no whispers. Ethan exhaled sharply. That's like something out of a movie. But it wasn't a movie. It was my life. Our lives. I looked down at the pendant, the daisy catching the dim light. All these years I'd cursed Robert for abandoning me, for vanishing without a word, for letting me drown in guilt. And all along, he'd sacrificed himself so that I could keep my world intact. Claire crouched beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. "Mom," she said softly, "you didn't betray us. You were betrayed too." Her words broke something open inside me. For the first time in 50 years, I let the tears come freely. They weren't the bitter, angry tears I'd cried in secret all those years. They were something gentler. Release. Ethan picked up one of the envelopes, scanning the label. "This one's addressed to you, Nana, from Grandpa Thomas." I hesitated, then nodded. "Read it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan unfolded the letter carefully and began to read aloud. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, it means you found what I could never say aloud. I knew about Robert, I knew about Claire, and I knew the truth long before you suspected I did. At first I was angry, not at you, but at how small and cruel the world can be to a woman in love. I decided then that my silence would be my act of love. You never owed me fidelity, Margaret. You owed yourself freedom. I failed to give you that. But I could give you peace, and I hope I did." Ethan's voice faltered. The last line was written in a shaking hand. "When you find this, don't mourn the years we lived as a lie. Remember them as the only way I knew to love you both." The room was quiet again, filled only with the sound of our breathing. Claire reached for me, and for the first time in days, I let her hold me. We stayed that way for a long time, 3 generations bound by truth, by pain, and by something that felt almost like forgiveness. I looked toward the window. The afternoon light fell across the desk, touching the daisy pendant like a final blessing. "He kept the secret to protect us," I murmured, "but he also left the truth behind, so we could set it free." And for the first time in 50 years, I felt the wind outside move through the open window, not as a ghost of the past, but as something alive, forgiving, and new. That night, the 3 of us sat around the dining table as if the air itself had changed weight. Claire kept the daisy pendant beside her teacup, turning it over in her fingers like it might whisper secrets if she listened closely enough. Ethan sat opposite me, hunched forward, his eyes darting between us, and the stack of letters spread across the table like fragile wings. No one really spoke for a while. Every sound, the tick of the wall clock, the rustle of the curtains felt too loud. Then Claire said quietly, "We should find out what happened to him, to Robert." The name felt lighter now, less forbidden, yet still electric on my tongue. "It's been 50 years, sweetheart. There may be no one left who remembers him." "Maybe," she said, "but we can try. He deserves that." And I knew she was right. For so long I had lived with an unfinished story, one that began with love and ended with silence. Now, after half a century, it was time to finish it. Ethan was already typing furiously on his laptop. "I found something," he murmured, scrolling. "A Robert Callahan, born 1931, worked at the docks, same county. There's a record of him moving to Maine in 1968, then again in 1972. He paused, eyes widening. "Wait, there's an obituary here. From 1995. Claire leaned closer. "Read it." He did, his voice careful, reverent. "Robert James Callahan, beloved husband to Eleanor, devoted father to Anna, and stepfather to Daniel. A man of quiet dignity and deep kindness. Known to his community for his service at the lighthouse and his volunteer work with veterans. Survived by—" I stopped listening after the word husband. My chest ached in a way that was both unbearable and strangely comforting. So he had lived. He had loved again. He had built a life, even after leaving me. But then Ethan frowned. "There's something else. Mom, Nana, look at this." He turned the screen toward us. At the bottom of the obituary, a familiar name appeared. "Arrangements handled by Reeves and Sons Law." Claire gasped. "That's Uncle Edward's firm." My heart stumbled. "Then he never really left us," I whispered. "He stayed connected. Through Edward." Ethan clicked another link. "And here's something even stranger. There's a record of property ownership, a small house near the coast. It was transferred to an estate under the name Margaret and Claire Trust in 1995. That's you two." I blinked in disbelief. "That can't be right. I've never owned any property in Maine." Claire looked at me sharply. "He must have left it for us." "Maybe Edward arranged it quietly. Maybe that's what he meant when he said he'd protect your name." Ethan nodded. "There's an address." "It's a 3-hour drive." The decision was made without being spoken. The next morning, we packed into the car and headed north. The road wound through miles of pine and fog, the kind of gray silence that feels like it's watching you. The closer we got, the heavier the air felt. When we finally pulled up to the address, I saw a small white house perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. The paint had peeled, and the fence leaned in places, but it had an unshakable stillness, as if waiting for us. A brass nameplate by the door read simply, "Willow's Rest." I felt my knees weaken. "He remembered," I whispered. "The willow tree." Claire squeezed my hand. "He never forgot you, Mom." We stepped inside. The air was faintly salty, touched with dust. Furniture draped in white sheets stood like ghosts in the half-light. On the mantel was a framed photo Robert in his later years, hair silver, eyes soft. And beside it, a smaller photo, of me, taken in 1955. The same one I thought I'd lost. Decades ago. Claire gasped. How did he? But I couldn't speak. My hand went to my chest, over the place where the pendant lay beneath my blouse. Ethan wandered into another room and called out, "There's a study here, and letters." We followed. On the desk was a box, labeled, "For M. Reeves, if ever found." Claire opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of letters, bound with ribbon, and an envelope addressed in Robert's unmistakable hand. My vision blurred as I read the first line. "My dearest Margaret, if this reaches you, it means I have gone, but not without leaving my truth behind. I wanted to see you once more before the end, but Edward insisted the silence must hold. He said you were happy, that Claire was loved, and that my presence could only bring ruin. I believed him, but I never stopped watching from afar. I clutched the paper. He was nearby all along." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "He watched over us?" I nodded, my voice breaking. "He knew about you. He must have known about Ethan, too. He probably saw you grow, Claire. Maybe even wrote those trust papers before he died." Ethan found a worn leather journal on the bottom shelf. "It's his handwriting," he said softly. "And, look, these entries, they mention you both." He began to read aloud, his voice trembling. "Saw Margaret at the market today, 1978. She hasn't changed, though her hair is silver now. Claire walks beside her, my girl, though she doesn't know it." She laughed, and I thanked God for the sound. I covered my mouth, the sob bursting free before I could stop it. Claire wrapped her arms around me, both of us shaking with a grief so old it felt like it belonged to the walls themselves. The journal went on, year after year, quiet observations, moments of distant tenderness. "Margaret stood by the church today. I wanted to speak, but Edward's car was there. She deserves peace, not ghosts. Claire's wedding notice in the paper. She's radiant. Thomas did well by them both. And the final entry, if I can't tell her, maybe someday the truth will tell itself. Love doesn't die. It just waits to be found again." By the time Ethan finished, the three of us were crying openly. The house seemed to hum softly, like the sea below was echoing the years between us. Claire looked at me, eyes red but shining. "He didn't leave us, Mom. He stayed as close as he could." I nodded, staring at the photograph on the mantel. "He gave us everything, his love, his silence, even this place. It's time to forgive the past." We stayed until sunset, watching the horizon swallow the light. As the waves crashed below, I whispered a prayer not for what was lost, but for what had finally been found. When we left, I locked the door to Willow's Rest and slipped the key into Ethan's hand. "Keep it safe," I said. "It's yours now. You're the one who brought the truth home." The sea wind caught the edge of my shawl as we walked to the car, carrying with it the faint scent of daisies. For the first time in 50 years, the ghosts of my heart finally let go. The week after we returned from Willow's Rest passed like a slow-moving dream. Everything felt softer, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for half a century. Claire stayed with me for a few days, cooking dinners I barely ate, keeping the radio low, and talking about little things, recipes, the neighbor's new dog, Ethan's university projects anything to fill the silence that truth had left behind. But every night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the daisy pendant glinting on the table beside my tea. I traced its edges with my finger and thought of both men, Thomas and Robert, and how, in their own ways, they had loved me beyond the rules of the world, one with words that burned like sunlight, the other with silence that shielded like night. On the 6th morning, the doorbell rang. I shuffled to the door, expecting the postman's usual knock, but the man standing there wasn't my regular courier. He was older, with kind eyes, and a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. "Mrs. Reeves?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a brown envelope, sealed with a red wax stamp. This was forwarded from a closed law office, Reeves and Sons, I believe. It was marked "Deliver" upon Margaret Reeves's 80th birthday, or later. It was found in an archive during a recent property clearance. My breath caught. "Who sent it?" He smiled faintly. "There's no sender listed, ma'am. Just this." He tapped the corner of the envelope where someone had written in neat, old-fashioned script, "For her eyes, when time has softened the edges." I thanked him and closed the door slowly. My hands trembled as I sat down at the table. Claire walked in just then, her hair still wet from the shower. "What's that?" "Something from Edward's office," I whispered. "A letter, addressed to me." Her eyes widened. "From who?" I broke the seal carefully, the sound of the paper tearing like a sigh from the past. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, and at the top, written in a familiar hand, were the words, "My dear Margaret." My vision blurred. "It's from Thomas," I said softly. Claire sat down beside me, holding my hand as I began to read aloud. "My dear Margaret, if this reaches you, then time has been kinder to you than I dared to hope. I imagine your hair has turned to silver now, and that you still keep your tea too strong. By now, you will have learned what I could never bring myself to say that I knew, that I always knew." I paused, my throat tightening. When Edward came to me all those years ago with Robert's confession, I was furious. Not with him, not even with you, but with the life that had left us no room for honesty. I told him I would never forgive him for meddling, but he only smiled and said, "You will, because love has longer legs than pride." I didn't believe him then, but I do now. Claire's lips trembled. "He really did know everything." I continued reading. "When Robert fell ill, he wrote to me, not to you. He said he didn't want to burden you with another goodbye. He wanted to thank me, imagine that, thank me for taking care of the woman he loved. We exchanged letters until the end. In his final one, he asked for something I could not refuse. He asked to be buried under the old willow tree where you once met." The paper slipped slightly from my fingers. "The willow tree," I whispered. Claire's eyes widened. "Mom, that's here. That's Miller's Field." My heart pounded. He was buried here, not in Maine? I kept reading, my voice shaking. His family wanted a grave site by the coast, but I arranged a small memorial under the willow instead, no headstone, just wildflowers. I planted them myself, the day after he passed. Every year since, I've gone back with fresh daisies. I knew you'd visit one day, even if you didn't know why. Tears blurred the ink on the page. I could see it now, all those quiet spring mornings when Thomas would leave the house early, saying he was going for a walk before breakfast, how he'd come home with a daisy tucked into his jacket pocket. I thought it was habit, or whimsy. I never guessed he'd been visiting Robert all along. Claire was crying silently beside me. Ethan had entered the room without us noticing, standing at the doorway like a ghost of the future, watching the ghosts of the past. I read the final lines slowly. I loved you both, him as my brother in fate, you as the keeper of my heart. The truth was never a punishment, Margaret. It was a gift we weren't ready to open. If you ever find this, promise me one thing. Visit the willow tree and bring a daisy for us both. The signature was faint, but unmistakable. Thomas Reeves. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The house was utterly still, as if even the walls were listening. Then I stood, gripping the letter tightly. "We have to go," I said. "Now." The field was exactly as I remembered it, though the grass had grown wild and the air smelled faintly of earth and rain. The willow's branches bowed low, heavy with years. Beneath it, the ground sloped gently toward the river, the same place where Robert had once told me he'd come back. I knelt there, the damp seeping into my knees, and ran my hand over the soft soil. "So this is where you've both been," I whispered. "All this time." Claire knelt beside me, setting a daisy on the ground. Ethan followed, placing another beside it. The petals fluttered in the wind like small white wings. For a moment, I could almost see them both, Robert with his easy smile, Thomas with that quiet strength in his eyes. Two men who had loved me in opposite ways, each giving up something precious so I could live without ruin. "Thank you," I said softly to the wind, "for the lies that were really acts of love, for the silence that kept us whole, and for finally letting me know." A breeze moved through the willow, brushing my cheek like a blessing. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang a single, clear note that faded into the distance. As we stood to leave, I took Claire's hand in mine and looked at Ethan. "Promise me one thing," I said. "Never let love make you hide. Tell the truth, even when it hurts. That's how you honor them." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I promise, Nana." We walked back through the field in silence, the three of us casting long shadows in the golden light. Behind us, the willow swayed gently, a keeper of secrets, a witness to love, and now, finally, at peace. When we reached the edge of the field, I turned once more. For the first time in 50 years, I didn't feel the weight of the past pressing on my shoulders. I felt light, whole. The daisy pendant glimmered against my chest as the sun slipped below the horizon, and I realized then that the truth hadn't destroyed us, it had set us free.